Ted Turner says that he's an atheist. That apparently, at least it was reported so, that played a part in his divorce from actress Jane Fonda. Fonda had become a Christian, and not just nominally, but actually got very involved in it, including Bible studies and learning and growing as best she could. And according to reports, Turner didn't deal well with that at all because of his atheistic belief and her now Christian belief. It just didn't work. And so the marriage eventually ended. When questioned as to why he's an atheist, Turner says it was because his sister, when she was dying, Turner prayed with all of his heart, as diligently as he could, that God would heal his sister, and God did not. His sister died. Therefore, he concluded that there must not be a God. Because he prayed, he asked, no answer came, therefore God just simply does not exist. I imagine that in Connecticut today, there may be some people struggling with those same emotions. They may not come to the same conclusions, but at least are struggling with the same emotions, like, if there is a God, why would God allow this to happen? Why would this terrible thing occur? Would it not be that God could stop this if God so chose? If we believe that God exists, then we must also believe that God could stop it if God so chose. So does that mean then that there is no God? I would think when it comes to a question as large, as huge, as trying to decide whether God exists or not, that conclusion could not be reached looking at any one thing, any one aspect, any one event. There are so many different things to consider. And so if I look at this and say, some guy walked into a school and shot 6- and 7-year-old children, killing them, does that indicate that God does not exist? Does it indicate that God does exist? I think there's one thing it clearly does indicate, and that is that evil exists. But I don't think we had to wonder whether that existed or not, because we have seen evil in so many ways in so many parts of the world for so long. Humans can be completely inhuman, or inhumane, I guess is the word, in the way that they treat other people. So we know that evil exists, there is no doubt, but does that become then the way we decide whether or not that God exists? Well, there's so many other things to examine, so many other things to examine. Like, if there's intelligent life on Earth, which is also debatable on occasion, but if there is intelligent life on Earth, then where did that intelligence come from? And you begin to look at all these things, like how did the universe come into existence, and how will it end, and all those kinds of things. Now, I'm not going to go into that. That's called Christian evidences. As a matter of fact, the actual word for it is apologetics. And I'm not about to get into apologetics today. I'm just trying to say that it's a much bigger picture than looking at any one event, any one occurrence, any one aspect of anything, to trying to decide if there is a God. There is a whole lot to consider there. I remember once sitting with a guy who cursed God as he told me he didn't believe that God existed. To which I replied, if he doesn't exist, who are you cursing? There's a whole lot going on here, a whole lot to consider. But rather than talking about the God side of it, I want to talk about the devil side of it for just a little while, if we may. Because obviously I believe that there is a God. I even debated, you guys, some of you guys I'm sure will remember the famous atheist Madalyn Murray O'Hair, the lady who sued and went finally to the Supreme Court and got prayer taken out of public school. I once debated her, which was just a fascinating experience. Some of you have heard me talk about it before, so forgive me for retelling the story, but I remember studying her diligently to find out all I could about her. As a matter of fact, the reason that she went to the court system was because her son was required to sit in the classroom when people prayed. He simply asked, can I step out into the hall while you pray? I don't believe that there is a God, and they forced him to stay in the classroom. She took umbrage to that, went to the school board to say, I don't think my son should have to be in that class because he doesn't believe there is a God. And then the good Christian people began to beat his son up, egg her house, paint swastikas on the side of her house. She retaliated by deciding, I'll sue. If the so-called Christian people had left her alone, we would have never heard of her. But she sued, and it went all the way to that. So I thought, when I'm going to debate her, I thought what I'm going to do is, she just probably hasn't been loved. So when she walks into the room, I'm just going to kiss her. But I couldn't do it. She was just so ugly. Well, I'm not talking about her physical appearance. I'm talking about the fact that she had such an evil, ugly spirit about her that it was repulsive. We talked about God's existence, and I asked her, if you don't believe there is a God, then how can you believe there's a greater law of morality? We talked about things like that. She replied that as a mother, I give life, therefore I know it's wrong to take life. So just the fact that mothers exist would give us that sense of morality, to which I replied, well, actually I didn't reply then, but later, then what about the mothers who kill? Somehow that seems a flawed system as well. So I look at this and go, as a Christian, I believe there is a God, but I also, as a Christian, believe that there is a devil. There is this being. I don't believe that the devil is living in people like God's Holy Spirit does. I don't believe the devil is actually making people do bad things, but I'm quite convinced that he and his angels are at work, and they manipulate situations as best they can, circumstances and so forth. So if they can find a weakness within a human being, whether that weakness is lust or hate, if they can find a weakness within a human being, they will try to tempt him or her, using that weakness to do things that could be just affecting a few people or things that affect a whole lot more. And why then? Why then would something like this occur if a devil exists? And I'm not saying the devil made that young man shoot those people, but if there is evil and if the devil's forces are at work, what then would they accomplish by such an evil deed as occurred in that school Friday morning? I think it comes down finally and ultimately to this: fear. Fear is one of the greatest tools that the devil's forces have. It's one of the greatest tools to do anything if you want to stop somebody from coming at you. If you make them afraid, then they tend not to do that. You see, doubt can make you hesitate, but fear can paralyze you. Now, fear can also propel you. Fear can propel you to run from what you're afraid of. But if you're face to face with that fear, if you have enough fear, it will just shut you down completely so that you cannot function. If you're trying to understand fear or explain fear, just comprehend fear in some fashion. Fear is an anticipation of a negative consequence. I anticipate that something bad is going to happen. So if you walked up here with a rattlesnake in your hand and you say, Joe, would you be afraid? Absolutely. Why? I have an anticipation of a negative consequence. Because if that thing bites me, it's going to be really, really bad. And plus, I suffer from a phobia. A phobia is a fear on steroids. Phobia is an unrealistic fear. I don't even look at a picture of a snake in a book. It just upsets me. I have that kind of phobia. Some people have fear of heights. They have those kinds of phobias. Believe it or not, I meant to look the word up and forgot. There's a word for the fear of teenagers, which is, as far as I'm concerned, not necessarily an unrealistic fear. But you look at this and you go, fear, how could this shut us down? Well, just last summer, somebody shoots up a movie theater. Every so often, somebody shoots up a school. There have been occasions even where people have shot up churches. I remember the one that happened over in the Dallas area a couple of years ago. Well, maybe more than that. Time moves so rapidly. It was a Wednesday night service of teenagers when a guy walked in with a pistol and started shooting. And some of the teenagers at first did not flee because they thought it was some kind of a skit, some kind of a way to illustrate things. It took them a few seconds to realize that those were real bullets and real people were having their flesh torn apart and real people were dying. So where do you go? Where do you live where you can say there's absolutely no fear? I don't think anybody can say there's absolutely no fear. Even if you live at home by yourself, totally barricaded, there still can be negative consequences. And so how then would the devil's forces use those fears against us as Christians, against us as a church? Well, I'm going to go to a parable that's probably not going to make any sense. Gentlemen, it's the Matthew 25 passage. If you look at the 25th chapter of Matthew, there's a story. Let me set it up for you so far. And you may think this has no application to what you're talking about. Yes, I'm convinced that it does. In this particular story, Jesus is talking about how the world is going to end. And as he's telling these parables, these stories, these illustrations, he talks about a master who's about to leave, and he takes some money. Now, in your Bible, you're probably going to find the word talent. The reason they use the word talent is because they're not exactly sure how much money it was. Because if it was a gold talent, it was worth so much. If it was a silver talent, it was worth another amount. But just to round it off, let's just say it's $1,000, because that would be pretty close, by the way, in our current economy, equal to about $1,000 of our money. I think sometimes it's thrown people when they think the word talent refers to talent like we think of talent, like the ability to sing or to play ball. It's an amount of money. And so he gave one man $5,000. He gave another man $2,000. He gave one man $1,000. He said, I'm going to be gone on a trip. Use this for me. And when he came back, he found the man that he had given the $5,000 to had invested it wisely, used it wisely, and gave him $5,000, earning 100% return on the money, which is pretty good. The $2,000 man had done the same, but the $1,000 man just had the $1,000. Here's what he said about it. Then the man who received one bag of gold, the $1,000, he said, Master, I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here's what belongs to you. I want you to notice what happens here. There was some risk in investing money. When we used to have money, we discovered that. Now in our life, it's just a totally irrelevant fact, but there is risk. There is risk in investing money. You may actually make money, you may come out even, you may lose money. A friend of mine who was a CEO of a company that was about to go public several years ago, I went to him and said, if I show you my portfolio of everything I've ever invested in and how much their stock went down after I did, how much will you pay me not to buy your stock? He actually considered it. So what this man did was so that he would not lose the money because he was afraid, it says. What he did, back up to that verse before that, gentlemen, because he was afraid, he went out and buried it. I'm not going to use this money because I'm afraid I'm going to lose it. Now, I want you to understand the primary thing in this parable is that this guy didn't do what he should have done because he was afraid. Fear. Fear paralyzed him. Because it was his fear that paralyzed him. Now, the next verse, the master is unhappy. He replied, you wicked, lazy servant. Wait a minute. In this story, in the parable, the servant here would be God or Jesus at best. And if he's trying to illustrate something, if he's trying to get us to understand some principle of life, what is it? Well, the guy was afraid, and because he was afraid, he did nothing. His master replied, to this man who did nothing because of his fear, he referred to him as being wicked. And of course, lazy. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. What he said is, you know that I expect things to occur, and you see me as a hard man because of that. It was your fear that you would disappoint me that caused you to do nothing. But I want you to hear this. My view of you is that your fear I'm seeing as wickedness. Your fear I'm seeing as laziness. Is there another verse there, gentlemen, in that particular? Well, then you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. Obviously, that would be the less risky investment. At least put it in the bank, earn some kind of interest on it, whatever interest that might be, because then at least you would have done something. So what is it that he's telling us in this parable? He's saying, when I see your fear, I'm not happy. If that fear immobilizes you, if that fear makes you shut down and do nothing, I want you to see you a passage in Revelation here, if I may, chapter 21. In this Revelation section, he said to me, it is done. I'm the Alpha and the Omega. Well, we know who that is. That's the Jesus, the Christ, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty, I will give water without cost from the spring of the water of life. That's a very reassuring passage. I like that. Okay, look at the next one. To those who are victorious, those who are victorious will inherit all this, and I'll be their God, and they'll be my children. Look at the word victorious. Back up one more, gentlemen. Look at the word victorious. He's saying, I will be with you, and I will offer you victory. So he's happy when we're victorious, understanding that the victories aren't just by ourselves. Our victories are by the power of God, but he's happy when we're victorious. But what about the other side of that? Then that next verse, he says, but the cowardly, the unbelieving. Notice where he characterizes these people. He categorizes them with the vile, the murderers, the sexually immoral, those who practice magic arts, the idolaters, and all liars. They'll be consigned to the fiery lake of burning sulfur. What did you say? You see, I look at a murderer and go, that's evil. Vile? Yes. Sexually immoral? All those things. But who did he put there? The cowardly and the unbelieving. The King James says the fearful and unbelieving, I think. What he's saying is there must be courage on the part of my people. Now, we listened a lot Friday. PBS was doing live coverage on the radio. Alice and I were out taking care of some errands for the company that we work with. And so we listened to PBS as we had to drive to various places, and we were listening to the reports as they came in. I remember hearing one psychologist they interviewed who studies mass murderers. He pointed out that in our country, in any given year, in America, in any given year, there are approximately 20 every year mass murders. The ones that make the paper are the ones with the highest body count, so we don't always hear about them, but about 20 every year. He also pointed out that between those 20 mass murders every year, they total about 150 victims. So about 150 people per year in the USA are killed by mass murderers. He then pointed out that pales in comparison to the number of individual murders in the US, which is about 15,000 people per year. So if you're going to be murdered, it's much more likely that you'll be a single victim than you'll be the victim of a mass murder. And yet the mass murder catches our attention because of the fact that it's just so grotesque. And it's even more vile when it's somebody who kills children. And we look at this, and I couldn't help, as I listened to it, to imagine, to see it in my brain of what it must have been like to be one of those parents. When you hear there's been a shooting at the school and your first or second grader is there, you're driving, it says that they were abandoning their cars because they couldn't get close enough to the school and running. You would have done the same, so would I. But I begin to imagine what it would have felt like. There have been times in my life when I had an anticipation of a negative consequence that was so overwhelming that I was living in pure terror. Just knowing would be less terrifying than anticipating. Have you been there? I mean, it would be terrifying to know, but just the fear. And I felt what I was thinking they would be feeling. Obviously not to the same degree because it was my imagination. Well, to some degree it was theirs too when they did not yet know. And what does it do to those people? That sheer terror. Do we stop sending our children to school? Do we quit going to the movie theaters? Do we stop coming to church? Do we live in fear? We cannot. We cannot live in fear of the mass murderer, or else we will be shut down. We cannot live in fear of the individual murderer, or we will be shut down. We know that the reason that terrorists do what they do is to instill fear. They can make you afraid to do anything and everything, and from that fear we shut down. So we can't do that with life. But let me make an application of that to spirituality. How many of us in our Christian lives have, because of our anticipation of negative consequences, pretty well shut down when it comes to our religion anyway? I mean, we live in a very tolerant society. I'm not against tolerance, believe it or not. I really am not. But while understanding and accepting the fact that people have the right to make their decisions, whatever their decisions are, I also have the right. As a matter of fact, not just the right, but the responsibility that I must make known what I believe as well. And so the fear that may keep somebody from going to a school or to a theater or even to a church, that's one thing. But I think the more prevailing fear that really affects Christianity is that most Christians are just afraid, dare I use the word cowardly, to share our faith, to say this is what I believe and this is why I believe it. This is the way I believe that people should behave. These things are wrong. We're just afraid of public censure, or even private censure, that if we stand up and say, I just don't think that's right, that certain people around us are going to ridicule us or perhaps even reject us because they say, you're just some kind of an old fogey. Why don't you get with the program? Why don't you understand that this is quite okay? I can accept the fact that people may choose to do that, but I don't have to accept the fact that that would be the right thing to do. And I do have not only the right, but the responsibility to speak up and say, based on what I believe, that is wrong. It shouldn't be done. Several years ago, I was speaking in San Diego. A reporter from MSNBC contacted my organization and said, is it okay if I come and listen to what Joe has to say? I was doing a program called Love, Sex, and Marriage. It was for a church, one of the congregations of the International Church of Christ that meets in San Diego. The reporter showed up. The part that he was most interested in, because he is the sexploration columnist for MSNBC, therefore he was most interested in what I had to say about sex. Now, he wrote an article on MSNBC that got a lot of interesting reactions. He didn't quote me right in several places. I don't think it was because he intentionally misquoted me. I wouldn't let him record it because people were talking back and forth to me, and therefore I wouldn't let him record it. He was taking notes as rapidly as he could. He was once a Catholic who has now become an agnostic. He was writing as fast as he could, and I do talk a little fast. At the same time, he didn't have the same background as all of us. He couldn't understand everything I was saying because he didn't have the same background. Therefore, he wound up misquoting me. I'm convinced it was not on purpose. I think that's just what he thought he heard. Do you understand that? One of the things he wrote about me, in that particular section, I put on the PowerPoint what the Bible said were sexual sins. That God said, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, along with the passages. And the people all had workbooks with the passages right there where they could look at it. And in that list, you would understand that one of the things was homosexuality, that the Bible says both in the Old Testament and the New Testament that it's wrong. You understand that that is there. Interestingly, when he wrote about me, he said, Joe said, because believe it or not, he and I became friends. He's even friends with Alice. We've become buddies. He said, Joe said homosexuality was wrong, but you could tell by his voice that he was apologizing for believing that. Now, I'm not quoting him exactly. That was the main idea of it. I don't remember how he phrased it. One of my friends, who's the head of the Indiana Dental Association, Doug Bush, read that article on MSNBC and called me and said, I've never heard you apologize for believing anything that you believe. What happened there? And I said, I think that's just what he heard. But I love people who are homosexual. I have friends who are homosexuals that I care very much about. But that does not preclude me from saying that I believe that is wrong. Because if that's what I believe, I have the right and the privilege to say it. Although I can love, care, and do everything I can for the benefit of those people, I can still stand up and say, this is sin. Is that not correct? Yet how many Christians would be even afraid to utter that in a private conversation, much less on a stage or on the Today Show or in some national forum? Why? Well, we're afraid. Of what? Well, there's an anticipation of a negative consequence. I'm going to get killed for this. Oh, we mean killed figuratively. Oh, here's another thing that we're afraid of. Not just afraid that people ridicule or reject us, but fear that if I stand up for what I believe, it may be that people will discover that I'm imperfect. There may be revelation of my own sinfulness. When they train Catholic priests to do exorcism, and not all priests are chosen for that, by the way, there are very special ones that are. When they train Catholic priests to do exorcisms, one of the things they teach them several things, believe it or not. One thing is how you can ascertain whether it's a demon or if it's something else. If you pass, by the way, the Catholic test for having a demon, you have one. It's not some psychological problem. If they say you do, because of all the tests you have to pass. Just trust me, you do. That's why even a bishop has to agree that you do, so that nobody goes off on some tangent. And when they train these guys, they train them several things, one of which is never ever go in alone if there are objects around that you can be hurt with. Because sometimes people in this situation can have unbelievable strength and they will do physical damage to you. So they remove things from the room that can be used against them. By the way, having been in situations where I believe that demons were being exorcised, I can tell you it can be quite physically scary. The second thing they teach them is this. Now, they teach them many, but this one really gets to me. You must understand, they said, that if it's truly a demon, there's a great likelihood that during the process, he is going to expose your sins. He's going to say it out loud through that body. I know you did this, and sometimes we'll even name dates and places and things. And the Catholic priests who practice exorcism have experienced that things from years ago would be revealed in the process. Now, I don't know whether you believe that exorcisms really take place or not. I don't know if you believe that a Catholic priest could do it, even if it could. I don't know what your individual beliefs are. Mine, they do occur. And yes, Catholic priests are involved in it. I do believe that. Reject or accept, I'm just telling you what I believe. But I'm telling you this, fear that people are going to find out what you have done or are doing wrong can shut you down entirely. So it's not just fear of physical harm. It's not just fear of ridicule or rejection. It can be fear of revelation, that you're going to find out that I'm imperfect, that I have sinned. Oh, by the way, we know that that's used against people. If you don't believe it, run for office. If they can discover anything you've ever done wrong, it will be on the television. It can be numbers of years ago. It makes no matter. What they're going to try to do is say, look. And then sometimes there really is fear of physical damage, that you may be beaten. I don't know what the situation is now, but back when I was in college, I always say the late 1800s, but I'll put this actually in the same. It was 1967, which for some of you would appear to be about the late 1800s. Chester Honeycutt was at the college where Alice and I attended. Chester Honeycutt had worked for many years up in the Cherokee Nations in North Carolina. And he talked about some of the beatings that would occur to the people of the Cherokee heritage when they became Christians, because people didn't want them following the Jesus way. Now, whether that happens this many years later or not, I do not know, but it happened then. I do know that in other parts of the world, you can still be beaten for being a Christian. I know that in other parts of the world, you can be imprisoned because of your Christianity. I know that in some parts of the world, you can be killed because of your Christianity. Oh, and it could happen here. So what do we do? Most churches are cowards. Boy, that's awfully condemning, isn't it? Let me rephrase that. Most churches are full of cowards. People who love God, who truly believe, but would never carry their faith outside the building vocally for fear of rejection or revelation. My sins will be revealed. Or even physical harm. There is evil. It'll only be a matter of time till somebody shoots up another church, another school, another theater. Because there are evil people in the world. But if we shut down and hide in our homes, we have done no good at all. And there will be people, as a matter of fact, there are people in our country who will do everything they can to make us afraid to stand up for what is right, what we believe, no matter how lovingly we do it. And I'm with them. The idiots that are mean and condemning, shut them up. But people who love but can still say, this is right and this is wrong. So the last passage, gentlemen, I'll just read it. Philippians chapter 4. He says, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I'll say it, rejoice. Let your gentleness, we're never called on to be mean, ever. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything. What's anxiety? It's holding that mental picture of the negative consequence. It's anticipating a negative consequence. It's a milder form of fear, but it's still fear. But in every situation, by prayer and petition meaning it's not just tossing off a prayer, it's really deeply, intently praying, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, because I know that God exists, and I know that the worst thing that can happen is that they'll send me to heaven early. Do you understand that? While it might tear me apart to lose somebody physically here, if what we believe is true, they have not been annihilated. They continue to live, but apart from the body, and will live forever. I can thank God for that. Present your requests to God. Next verse, gentlemen. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. You see, I can have peace rather than anxiety when I quit thinking or anticipating about the negative consequences and start focusing on the positive consequences, which are these. If I stand up for what's right, I may lead somebody to make a decision to change his or her life. Then what's the positive consequence? They get to go to heaven. Not just change their life here, which is good, but hereafter as well. What's another positive consequence? I've made God happy because I've rescued a soul. What's another positive consequence? Well, when I get to heaven, God's going to bless me for having been fearless rather than fearful. My heart bleeds for the parents in Connecticut. Never would I make light of their pain. I cannot understand what they feel because I've never lost a child to murder. Can't comprehend what they go through. May God heal their pain. May God heal their hurt. But based on what we believe, those children are not dead. They're in a different realm. And not one of them is lost. They're children. So when I embrace and understand their pain and cry and hurt with them, I also embrace and accept the fact that those children are with God. And not just rejoicing in theirs, but in every person that I've been able to lead to Jesus, every person that John's been able to lead to Jesus. And if you've led anybody to Jesus, every person that you've led to Jesus too. But if we're ever going to lead any more, it will never be from cowardice. Never. Courage. Courage because we know this is not all there